Just to give myself a quick introduction, I am Tepang. I am a holistic health coach with a focus on helping women transform their relationships with food and their body. And I'm here doing this work because I have been on my own journey of complete body hatred and just having a totally messed up relationship with food. Hey Kanye, thank you for joining. Good to see you. So I'm doing this work because I am really passionate about helping women achieve the transformation that I achieved, being able to heal my relationship with my body and heal my relationship with food. And this is work that I'm still continuously doing because it's never a finished thing, but I really want to be able to just help women break free from diet culture and body hatred and disordered eating. So we're talking about body trust and body literacy today. So why is this important? It's important because if we want to be able to reach a place of peace with food, we need to be able to trust the signals that our body gives us about our hunger, about our fullness, etc., etc. So the first point that we are talking about today, hey Arissa, thank you for joining. So the first point that we're going to talk about is called honoring your hunger to help us develop body literacy. This is based off of a principle from the intuitive eating framework. And in terms of honoring your hunger, that simply means that when you notice yourself getting hungry, instead of allowing yourself to go hungry for ages or ignoring your hunger because you're trying to be on a diet or you're doing intermittent fasting or whatever else is trending out there, listen to your hunger and give yourself that opportunity to eat when you're at a level of gentle hunger instead of when you're ravenous. Because what often happens is when you are overly hungry, let's say you're like a 10 out of 10 or a 9 out of 10 hungry, when you go eat, you're gonna eat a lot more than you would have if you had just given yourself that opportunity to eat at a point of gentle hunger. And why is it important to focus on eating when you're hungry to prevent overeating? We're not speaking about preventing overeating from the diet culture point of view where we're trying to restrict our calories for body image reasons. We're simply speaking about honoring your hunger, eating at a level of gentle hunger to prevent overeating, because overeating is part of disordered eating and we have the objective of developing a healthier relationship with food. So that is the first point, honor your hunger. And so I'm going to give you some practical tips on how you can actually do this. So let's get into the practical tips of how to honor your hunger. Firstly, something that you can use is a hunger scale. I know that some people may be triggered by numbers because of using things like scales, food scales, or weighing your body and stuff like that. So if using numbers is something that does not trigger you, then using a food scale, a hunger scale, can be really useful to help you assess your level of hunger. So you could, for example, say on a scale of 1 to 5, how hungry am I? And you know that anything from 3 and above, you choose to go and eat. Or maybe if you're just 2 out of 5 hungry, you're like, okay, I'm struggling to focus on my work right now because I'm hungry. Let me just go get a snack. So a hunger scale is something that you can use to just assess the level of hunger that you're experiencing and know when to eat and how much to eat for your individual body, instead of using things like what time of the day is it, what time does my meal plan say I should eat, right? So we're working on basically being able to listen to our hunger and trust our bodies. The second thing is keep yourself adequately fed throughout the day. Like I mentioned earlier, if you leave yourself to that point of getting completely ravenous, when you go eat, you're just gonna eat a whole lot because your body thinks that you're starving. So keep yourself adequately fed throughout the day and make sure that you also eat an adequate quantity of carbohydrates, because carbohydrates are the body's preferred source of fuel. So those are the tips for honoring your hunger. This is the first point about body literacy, is being able to identify when you're hungry and how hungry you are so that you can respond appropriately. So the second thing in tandem with honoring your hunger is feeling your fullness. But before I move on, can I just get a thumbs up in the comments for those of you who are here, just to check that this is landing for you and that you're doing okay? And while I wait for those thumbs up, I'll just move on to the next point, which is about feeling your fullness. So in as much as it's important to honor your hunger and respond appropriately to your hunger, we also want to be able to feel our fullness as we're eating and respond appropriately to that fullness as well. So something that can sometimes lead to overeating, like I mentioned, is when you eat at a point where you're too hungry. And when you eat at that point where you're too hungry, it becomes difficult to tune into your body during a meal to actually feel how the food is impacting your hunger / your fullness levels, right? So that's the part about how just basically eating when you're too hungry can affect your ability to be able to identify how full you are. Going back to that hunger scale that I mentioned in the first point, you can also use this hunger scale when you're eating to assess, okay, I started at a 3 out of 5 hungry, now I'm at a 2, okay, I can keep eating a little bit more. So, something that often causes overeating, because now we're speaking about feeling your fullness. So overeating simply means eating past that point of comfortable fullness, whatever that is for you. So something that often causes overeating is the feeling of deprivation, like psychologically. When you're on a diet, you are putting yourself through deprivation, literally physically, because you're not getting enough like energy in the food that you're eating, but also psychologically, because you're not allowing yourself the pleasure from eating the foods that you actually desire. And I mentioned this in the first round of lives that I did last week about the cycle between dieting and binging is a form of overeating. When your body and your mind feels like you're not getting enough food and you're not actually allowing yourself the foods that you want to eat, when you do eventually lose your willpower, you're going to gravitate towards eating those foods that you've been depriving yourself of, and you're going to eat them in abundance because your body is craving that energy and you are psychologically just craving what you have been depriving yourself of. So in allowing ourselves to actually feel our fullness, we also need to give ourselves permission to eat the foods that we truly desire to eat in that specific meal. So what are some tips for how we can feel our fullness? So I'll give you some practical tips. The first is mindful eating. This is something that you may or may not have heard about, but it basically just speaks about being present in your meal. So some things that you can do to make your meal more mindful is to give thanks for your meal before you eat, right? Because when you give thanks, you look down at your food, you take it in on a sensual level, you take in the smell, you take in how it looks, the different colors on your plates, and that actually starts preparing your body, your digestive system, to break down the foods and extract the nutrients and the energy that your body needs. So give thanks for your food and make eating a sensual experience with all of the senses that you can use in your meal. And then another thing is take a moment while you're eating just to pause. Like, this is something that could be extremely difficult to do if you ate extremely hungry. But if you started at a level of gentle hunger, you should be able to pause mid-meal and ask yourself, go back to the hunger scale if that's something that you'd like to use, to figure out how full you are, and then you can assess how much of the food that's left you want to eat. Maybe you want to finish the food in your plate and get a little bit more, or maybe you've dished up a little bit too much and you can come back to it later. So pause mid-meal and use your hunger scale. And then in the same way, pause at the end of the meal and see how you're feeling. Did you maybe overeat? Did you maybe not give yourself enough food? And then take a moment to respond appropriately. If you need more food, give yourself more food. And if you find that you overate, just take a moment to breathe, let go of any judgment, because we can sometimes be extremely and unnecessarily judgmental to ourselves. And just, instead of being judgmental, be curious. Ask yourself, this is a moment now for you to come in and coach yourself. Ask yourself, okay, why did I overeat? What emotions was I experiencing? What was I experiencing physically? Did I maybe leave myself hungry for too long? Or maybe you were experiencing some emotions that unconsciously you decided that you were going to use food to deal with those emotions. So it's really important in these moments where we catch ourselves in habitual acts of disordered eating, overeating, ask yourself why you're doing that instead of being judgmental, because you can use that information to move you forward in developing a healthier relationship with food. Okay, so we have discussed honoring your hunger and we have discussed feeling your fullness. So I'll move on now to the point of discussing body literacy And basically under body literacy, I'm going to be talking about how do you identify hunger, because for some people, especially if you have been undergoing a diet for a while, you may have lost touch with your ability to notice the feelings that you experience when you're hungry and also when you're full. And if you aren't able to understand your body's signals, you aren't going to be able to listen and respond appropriately. And it's through listening, responding, that we're able to develop this body trust with the foundation of body literacy. So now we're going to be chatting about how to identify your specific hunger and fullness signals. So I'll give you, for example, some examples of hunger signals, and that could be suddenly finding yourself thinking about food when maybe 5 minutes ago you weren't thinking about food. That can be a sign that you're hungry. Maybe experiencing lightheadedness, dizziness, irritability, tiredness, and maybe even a headache. And the group of symptoms that I just mentioned now usually relate with low blood sugar, which, going back to the part that I mentioned in honoring your hunger, giving yourself adequate carbohydrates throughout the day keeps your blood sugar stable. So if you start experiencing the lightheadedness, the tiredness, inability to concentrate, it likely means that you have gone too long without eating and your blood sugar is dipping, and you just need to gently get it back up with a balanced meal. So, and then other symptoms, which is pretty obvious, is like gurgling and rumbling of the tummy. So those are some hunger signals. And then in terms of fullness, I think this is like hugely individual. For me, I tend to experience like feeling like my tummy is growing, or like my stomach just feels more dense, whereas before I ate, it felt like literally empty. If you find that you maybe ate a bit too much, you could experience some bloating, or maybe you ate something that doesn't treat your body too well, you could experience bloating. Maybe you could experience fatigue, feeling like you need to sleep. Those can be symptoms of noticing your fullness setting in. So maybe you guys can let me know, what do you typically experience like symptom-wise when you feel hungry or when you feel full? Like, you can type in the comments below and we can just get a bit of a conversation going. So something that's actually also really helpful in developing body literacy is keeping a food journal. So when I was kind of like working through my food issues at the beginning of my journey, I kept a food journal. And this is something that my food therapist recommended to me because I was extremely harsh on myself, very tough, negative self-talk, and just too perfectionistic with myself. So she told me to use a food journal just to be able to observe my eating patterns during the day. And in this conversation that we're having, you can use a food journal to ask yourself, okay, what times of the day do I typically get hungry? How do I experience this hunger? Maybe you can start noting down the symptoms that personally come up for you when you get hungry. Ask yourself, okay, what food did I eat? Did it satisfy me? Did it not satisfy me? So there's a whole lot of questions that you can ask yourself, and you base those questions based off of the information that you're trying to learn about yourself and your relationship with food. And you can do this for a week, you can do it for 2 weeks, really as long as you need to be able to start to understand your body a lot more when it comes to food. So, okay, again, if you're still good, you can give me a thumbs up in the comments, and then I'll move on to the last section of this live, which is about discovering the satisfaction factor. So this is also a principle from intuitive eating, and it speaks about how eating is not just about giving our body sustenance and energy, but eating is also an experience that needs to give us satisfaction and pleasure. So now, previously we spoke about feeling your